So the show goes on. In the work we do, I think we often get a rap of kind of bringing bad news and focusing on the negative. So it's a real pleasure when we have an opportunity to acknowledge the hard work that states do and the accomplishments that they have. And so that is very much the focus of our next segment here. And so we're going to hear from the superintendent of the top-ranked state this year, which, as you've heard, is Maryland for the third year in a row. First time that's happened, we've issued overall grades for 4 years, and Maryland's been at the top for the last 3. So perennial strong performer. You've got Dr. Grasmick's bio in your pack. I won't read it. It's a very distinguished career in education. I will mention, of course, Nancy is the longest-serving appointed state education chief in the country. She's in her 19th year of her tenure. There's often discussions about the importance of leadership in education, whether it's at the local or at the state level. And although it's not something we can show you an index on, I think we all know anecdotally that given the ins and outs and turmoil that you often have in state politics, having a state school chief who is there for the long term, who is dedicated to students and schools, and who can, both see reform and priorities as they need to be and make that happen over the long term is very important. And the work we do with Quality Council in particular is that annual drumbeat, the continual focus on the important issues and the important strategies. That is important, and I think certainly we see a lot of that in Maryland. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn the stage over to Nancy Grasmick, who's going to deliver some remarks, and then we'll have a little bit of an interview.
Thank you, Chris. Well, thank you very much, Chris. And I want to thank Amy Hightower, and I want to thank Mark Baumster and Ed Week. As Chris said, I've been in this position now 19 years. It'll be 20 years in September. And so with the inauguration of the Education Week analysis, I recall that 15 years ago. And of course, today, I'm very proud for Maryland to have achieved this level. And I share that with the governor of the state, Governor O'Malley, with the legislature, and with the incredible educators we have within the state of Maryland. So I want to say something about how this report has impacted us over the years. It is really one of the few places where we see this comprehensive data and our policy decisions coming together to offer us a roadmap so that as we think about what are the changes that we're going to make, we have such solid data. And we have ideas that not only come from our own state, but from all of the states within this country. And so it's been a valuable, valuable guidepost for me in terms of my position. Although I rejoice today and I bask in the reflected glory of so many people who have contributed in Maryland, including our students, I know that we have a great deal of work to do. We have advantages in Maryland, and I think in the spirit of the unvarnished truth, I need to say those things. First of all, Maryland is among the wealthiest states in this nation. Maryland has a huge number of jobs which are oriented toward government work, whether that's research work or actual constellations of government activities. And so the recession that has affected so many states within this nation, Maryland has had a level of stability. That is not to say we haven't had challenges as it relates to the economy. We have a very, very comprehensive educational community that is characterized by only 24 school systems, compared to many states having 500 or 600. I meet with all of the local superintendents once a month. We talk about our policy issues, and we resolve how we're going to move forward, and we move forward in tandem. And so if one looks at all of the systems within Maryland, the local school systems, you will see a consistency in terms and fidelity in terms of policy implementation. Now, we are challenged by a very diverse population, perhaps not more diverse than other states in this nation, but just to paint that picture for a moment and the challenges associated with it. We have about 200 languages spoken in the public schools in the state of Maryland. We have very high wealth areas compared to some of our urban areas, which are very challenged in terms of wealth. However, Maryland has placed public education at the top of the political agenda, and as such has protected public education from some of the cuts that other states have experienced. We have a funding formula that was really organized back in 2002. It is funded by state funding inverse to the wealth of the local jurisdiction. So there's a sense of ability to have a level of equity in terms of funding across all 24 school systems. And so the poorer jurisdictions receive huge amounts of state money as opposed to those which are wealthier. And that has enabled us to ensure some consistency of implementation of policy for our students. I would like to say that we've made some policy decisions that I think have made a huge difference. And when we look at Education Week, we actually drill down, and I'm in the process of doing that now, for every single indicator. And where is Maryland vis-a-vis those indicators? And we're not consistently strong in all of those indicators. And so there are areas where we'll be examining those. But one of the things that has I think, impacted Maryland and its success has been the sense of transition. And when I say transition, I mean beginning at the beginning. To my knowledge, we're the only state in the nation which has placed every early childhood program within the State Department of Education. Beginning with infant and toddlers, even our subsidy programs, which generally reside in social services, are now within the State Department of Education, giving the message that as early as possible, education is the central point for our young children. We have these relationships that have been spawned from that to places like the Mind Brain Institute at Johns Hopkins and the work being done in neuroscience in terms of the learning patterns of very young children. So these kinds of policies have enabled us to ask the question, as every child comes to full-day kindergarten in Maryland, is this child positioned to be successful in a formal schooling environment? And we look at 7 different domains of the child's functioning. When we began that in 2002, we could answer affirmatively for only 42% of our children coming to school. This past year, it was 78%. And we won't stop until it's 100%. And so we then follow those children on a longitudinal basis, and when formal assessment begins in 3rd grade, we then look at that cohort of children. And I can tell you that since 2002, every cohort of 3rd graders is achieving at a higher level than the previous cohort of students. So that's just one, I think, very significant example. We have a P220 Council, which then blends us all together in terms of no starting points and stopping points as we look at students moving into careers and students moving on to higher education. And what are the policies? Because our lives are inextricably related as we think about the success opportunities for our students. And so those are policies which have guided our thinking. I also want to compliment Massachusetts and New York specifically. We have learned so much from Massachusetts, which has impacted Maryland. And we've learned it not only through our relationship with that state, but through Education Week and what we've learned from the analysis of the data as it relates to Massachusetts, which we just see as a premier functioning state. And so as we think about the circumstances of Maryland and where we're preparing our students, we're interested because of the opportunities for Maryland students in issues of STEM education. We're interested in biomedical because that's a huge industry within Maryland. And so as we look at the achievement factors, and we have a ways to go in terms of achievement factors because we do have an achievement gap among our students. And when we wrote our Race to the Top application, we did it through the lens of eliminating an achievement gap while accelerating every single group of students and that performance of those students. And we were fortunate to receive that $250 million. So as I conclude some of these remarks, I'd like to say what we forecast for the future. Maryland used the stimulus money very generously given, as it was given to the governor. A huge percentage of that went to education to fully fund our educational formula. There are two major discussions occurring as our General Assembly convenes tomorrow. One has to do with the potential elimination of some percentage of that funding formula for public education in Maryland. And so we are going to be faced by that challenge. If 5% were to occur, it would mean $35 to $40 million cut from the Baltimore City budget, and that would have a serious impact. The other part is that the state in Maryland pays all of teacher pensions. And so as local jurisdictions raise the salaries of teachers when that was possible, the state picks up the bill for the pensions. And so now the discussion is, should the local jurisdiction have to pay some of the pension costs? Or are the those who are part of the pension system would increase their contributions? I make this point because if that responsibility is shifted in Maryland to the local school systems, it will have an impact on the operating budgets of those school systems. We have not laid off one teacher because of the economic circumstances that this nation is facing. That situation may change dramatically based on whatever decisions are made as we matriculate through this General Assembly. So to Education Week, I express my gratitude. You have guided us in such important ways over my 19 years and your 15 years. And so I often say this related to teachers who are certainly being applauded for great contributions or principals. When you're at a very top level, you have a ways to go, but sometimes that jump is a little bit harder. But we have to keep our eye on what are the things that will enhance opportunities for our students. I served on the National Academy of Sciences report on rising above the gathering storm. And if there's one way I see Education Week helping us so much, if we really take this seriously, it was all about America's competitiveness. And unless we continue to accelerate our efforts in public education, we are not going to remain the competitive nation where we've all assumed we would always be. So thank you very much. So,
Thank you, Dr.
Mark.
Grasmick.
Thank you.
Thanks. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Grasmick. I'd like to just talk a little bit to kind of expand a bit on some of the things that you were discussing. If you can, you've highlighted a couple of the areas where you think Maryland has proven especially strong. In light of the continued economic pressures that Maryland is facing along with the other states, how do you intend to keep that momentum up? There's a considerable amount of budgetary pressure that's going to be on the State Department, on the individual districts. So how do you keep to the priorities that you've laid out?
Well, I think being part of a bureaucracy, and a State Department of Education is a bureaucracy, and local school systems to an extent are a bureaucracy. I think we have a tendency to continue to accelerate, but we don't dismiss or remove responsibilities. And so what I've said to every local superintendent, tell me what we're asking of you that seems frivolous or obsolete given the circumstances we're facing. And let's narrow our focus so that we have our priorities and are not distracted by old priorities which are no longer relevant. I mean, that seems like a simple thing, but every single regulation we have has had an advocate politically. And so it's a tough thing to do, but it is a distraction, and it also is costly, and it takes resource time from people, and people are our greatest resource. And so that's a step that I've taken, to remove those obsolete requirements and to narrow so that we have very well-defined priorities. I also have been looking at the senior year of high school, and because we talk about this issue of transition and working with higher education, I am actually convinced that we have an old paradigm in saying it has to be 4 years of high school. We have students who are more than ready to enter college after 3 years. And so I am now instituting some policies like flexibility of high school so that you can go 3 years. Some students may need 4 years. Some students who are coming to this country for the first time as 11th or 12th grade students may need 5 years. And I'm also instituting a program with the community colleges, which others may have, but we have it in Maryland, where you earn the AA degree and the high school diploma at the same time. And so we're accelerating opportunities for students. There are some cost savings associated with these efforts, I think. So I think it's that level of creativity, being much more focused on the individual student and the circumstances of the individual student as opposed to one size fits all.
Now you had referenced that there are requirements that you maybe look for additional flexibility for requirements to the local districts. At the same time, you do have some big challenges coming up in the implementation of some national priorities. Maryland is a race to the top state, and that comes with certain promises and responsibilities. In this current budgetary environment, how do you follow through with those?
Well, first of all, my biggest challenge with 188 legislators, when they hear $250 million and recognize that Maryland has a $1.6 billion deficit, that they don't think they can use $250 million to supplant. We have to make it very clear that the race to the top was based on a commitment to achieve certain goals, and that money has been allocated to move us toward the achievement of those goals and cannot substitute for formula money, etc. It may seem simple. It isn't simple. And I know it isn't simple, and it's going to start tomorrow not being simple. So We have said our Race to the Top application was really what we called our third wave of reform, that we had stepped from 1989 in developing one of the early systems for assessment and accountability. In 2002, changing our funding formula, not based on litigation, by the way, where it was in most states, and establishing a very strong statewide curriculum. We're ready for the next step, and that has become our Race to the Top application, which was not on the side of what we're doing, but absolutely central to all of our reform efforts. And so we're seeing those reform efforts as being our work, our primary work that we have to do in public education in the state of Maryland, and that other things really take a low priority.
You mentioned assessments, and that may dovetail to some degree with the Maryland's participation in the Common Core effort, which has an assessment component to it and other components. Can you talk a little bit about the common standards and Maryland's involvement?
Well, we signed on to the Common Core standards very early, and we did so because we actually believed that they would strengthen our curriculum. And we also liked the idea that there was certainly more articulation with international benchmarks. And so we've completed our gap analysis with our current curriculum. We've worked with higher education to do that because we wanted the assurance that when we fully embrace those Common Core standards, that they would then provide for a smooth transition in consideration of higher education. We're now in the process of rewriting our curriculum based on that gap analysis that was done. I'm serving on the executive committee of the PARC consortium to develop the national assessments. And so we're very excited about the potential of those assessments. As strong as I think our assessment program has been, I think it has been strong. I think it has had limitations in that it has primarily been a summative assessment system, as opposed to formative, benchmarking, et cetera, which will have much more impact in terms of instruction, looking at students diagnostically, and intervening. And I think that is the hope.
What reception are you getting from your local superintendents as far as buy-in goes for this? What concerns do they have, and how do they regard this movement?
We've had, as I indicated in the comments I made, we have this very collaborative educational system in Maryland with our 24 local superintendents. So we've had huge support in terms of their support for the direction that we're taking. Obviously, all of them are very focused on the budgetary issues and concerned about what are the constraints that they're going to experience if we have any major cuts. But I have to say that from a perspective of really wanting this to be successful on behalf of our students, we have huge cooperation.
Before we move to questions, I'd like to also open things up just a little bit to ask about a couple of teacher issues. In particular, teacher evaluation. There's some interesting things that have been happening in the state of Maryland along these lines. And I'd like to know what you have to say about that.
This is one of our greatest challenges. And in our application for Race to the Top, we indicated that 50% of a teacher or principal's evaluation would be based on student growth. We know there are no perfect models in this country. And in that regard, the governor appointed an Educator Effectiveness Council, which I am co-chairing with a member of a NEA affiliate. And we have all of the anticipated stakeholders being part of that effort. What we're finding is that there has been a real level of polarization around this issue in Maryland. And that is that we have only one jurisdiction, which is an AFT affiliate, and that's Baltimore City. Baltimore City, people in the audience may know, just signed an incredible contract where they've done away with all the steps. It's based on teacher effectiveness, principal effectiveness, and they're awaiting our product to be able to implement this new and exciting contract they have. We're really making baby steps in terms of resolving this issue of what are the factors that would contribute, and is there going to be a consistency across every jurisdiction in terms of the rigor of the particular metrics that are used? Is it going to be left up to the local, or is there going to be a portion of this that is going to be state required? And so getting into the metrics, we know that more than 65% of our teachers are teaching in what has not been traditionally tested areas, state tested areas, and how does that play into it? And so we're really grappling with this issue now. We're very grateful, I really have to say this, to AFT for their very progressive vision in terms of what's possible. And they've been a tremendous help to us through the Baltimore experience.
Thank you, Dr. Grasmick. I'd like to open things up for questions. We have room for a question here. Yes, right here in the back.
Hi, my name is Mike Town. I'm actually a science teacher who this year is serving as an Einstein Fellow with the National Science Foundation. When I look at the data, there's one data point that really jumps out at me, which is your AP scores.
Yeah.
You guys are double the national average and 5-6 times greater than other states. How do you do it?
Oh, thank you for reminding me. I should have said that as a brag point. For 2 years in a row, we've been number one in terms of the achievement of our students in the national tests for advanced placement. How we do it, again, it was an analysis. I was, even though we always had a respectable sort of placement in terms of advanced placement, it was clustered in a few jurisdictions. And I said that's not acceptable. Every single student in the state of Maryland who has a desire to pursue AP ought to be able to do that. And so we really began a campaign. We have a very unique relationship with College Board. We have a person whose responsibility is to prepare our teachers to deliver the AP curriculum with fidelity. And that person travels throughout the state and does that. And we pay half the salary, College Board pays half the salary, and that person has been with us about 7 years. I actually meet with every superintendent, and we do a very careful analysis of AP offerings in every single high school in the state of Maryland. And we have high schools offering 32, 35 sections of advanced placement, but we don't have high schools offering nothing. And that is just accelerating every single year. And so it's through professional development, through saying this is a high priority for our state and opportunity for our students. And so as a result, there has, as I indicate, we have this collaborative relationship, and I actually bring the College Board people in. We have coded every location in the state of Maryland, color-coded it. Where do we have an intense concentration of students taking AP? Where don't we? And what's going to change about that? So it's been a huge effort, but professional development, because it doesn't benefit us if we have students taking AP that are not, where it's not taught with fidelity, and then taking the national test and getting a 1. So we are linking the two things together, but thank you for asking the question.
Yes.
Hi. It feels funny for me to call you Dr. Grasmick, but I will, just because I've known
Miss Nancy, please.
Thank you for your comments about the AFT and the work we've done in Baltimore City. But talk a little bit about your perspective, because a critical part of that contract is not just teacher evaluation, but it's teacher development.
Right.
And at the AFT, we don't say teacher evaluation unless we say development. So can you talk a little bit about what the state will do there to support that?
Yeah, we're excited about that, and I do think that it is the most important part, because the evaluation is clearly so linked to development and the opportunity for professional development. And so we are going to be conducting what we call teacher and principal academies, for instance, this summer. Every single principal in the state of Maryland, and that includes every school in Baltimore City, will be coming to these teacher academies. And those principals will then select teachers who will come to the academy. And we will be working in terms of what is relevant in terms of professional development for those teachers. But it is also rewarding teachers who take the initiative for additional, and we're not saying get a master's degree, but we're saying taking other coursework, other kinds of experiences that will continue to accelerate their effectiveness as teachers and principals. And so we're working with you. We're supporting the idea of compensation, and I know your contract speaks to that compensation, but that also we're using you as our model for the rest of the state, because we're saying we need to shed some of the old lockstep approaches that we've had and say compensation needs to be based on effectiveness, and effectiveness is enhanced by professional development. So working together.
That's all the time we have. We could, I think, just keep this particular conversation going and going. There's a lot to learn here. But for now, I'd like to thank Nancy for being here.
Sure.
Congratulations again. And we're going to move right into our next session. So next presenters and moderator,
Thank you,
Thank
Mark.
you so much.
please make your way to the front.
It was great talking with you.
Thank you. You'll do this better than I will.
And as we get our speakers mic'd up, I'll just fill the air here a little bit. No weather reports, nothing's happening outside, so that's good news for anybody who has to travel locally today. Quality counts and our other annual reports are a little bit out of our general mode at Education Week. Mostly we focus on a variety of state and federal policy issues as a key piece of our reporting. But first and foremost, Education Week is a publication that really gears toward informing district leadership. These are, school superintendents, school board members, are a really key part of who we've always written Education Week for. And so it's very gratifying to be able to bring together a great panel for an event like this where, in addition to the big 30,000-foot perspective in terms of the report card, in terms of some of the policy discussions we'll have later, we really do want to bring this back down to the ground and talk about what the experience at the local level has been like, what some of the challenges as well as the opportunities for some really fundamental innovation and improvement are in light, despite, and in fact, because of the economic environment these days. And I think this is a panel that's really going to be able to lead us through a very in-depth, substantive discussion on that. So my duty now is just to introduce our moderator here, and he'll take the introductions for the panel. Our moderator for this session is going to be Sean Cavanaugh. Sean Cavanaugh is an assistant editor at Education Week, longtime reporter. He's covered a variety of issues. If you look at his bio, it's quite the laundry list of education topics. Done some great reporting from China a few years back, and my first opportunity to work closely with Sean was actually, I think, back right after I came to Editorial Projects in Education. We teamed up some work around evolution when the Dover case was going on, and that was, it's somebody who has a biology degree. That was just a terrific issue in general, and fascinating to follow. And Sean's coverage, of course, was top notch. But Sean is also the lead writer for Quality Counts this year, and so he knows the ins and outs of these issues as well. So Sean, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Chris. So across the country today, school district leaders are having to make do with less money, and if what the financial experts predict is correct, they're going to have to be making do with less money for a long time to come, probably, or at least the next 2 to 4 years. So there's probably no better way to get a good understanding of the challenges facing districts than by talking to people who are on the ground facing those challenges every day. And our panelists today offer that perspective. They're facing the grim realities that leaders in other school districts are, but they're also working to try to reposition school districts so that they spend money more wisely and channel resources where they're most needed, to students in classrooms. So let me introduce our guests. Our first guest is Matthew Stansky. Matt serves as the Chief Financial Officer for the Prince George's County Schools here in suburban Washington. He oversees a budget of $1.6 billion. Before joining the school system, he worked as a legislative analyst for Prince George's County government. Matt is helping to implement a new student-based budgeting system in his district, which gives principals more control over spending decisions, an approach he'll describe in a minute. Our second guest is John Scanlon, who's come down from Rochester City School District in New York, where he serves as Deputy Superintendent of Administration and manages a $700 million budget. John had a 26-year career in the U.S. Navy, serving as a captain and as a commanding officer of the Navy's Fleet Readiness Center Southeast. He has also served as Chief Operating Officer of the Oklahoma City Public Schools. John's district is working to put in place a weighted student funding formula, which is designed to improve academic results and place resources where they're needed most. And our third guest works not just in one district, but in many of them. Many of you probably know Karen Hawley-Miles. She's the President and Executive Director of Education Resource Strategies based in Massachusetts. Her organization partners with districts to study how they can use resources more effectively and align their spending in ways to improve student performance. Prior to joining ERS, Karen worked at Bain & Company as a consultant to hospitals and corporations, and she has more than a decade of experience working with Fortune 500 companies. So thank you all for joining us. And Karen, let me start with you. Since you've been involved with a lot of districts and can kind of give us the big picture view, generally speaking, what are you hearing from school systems in terms of how the financial downturn has affected their operations and spending and the choices they're being asked to make?
Yeah. So can you hear me from this? Okay. So I guess the first thing, and this audience is really, sort of a sophisticated one compared to where I'm usually speaking, but we cannot overestimate the extent of the gap here. And we'll talk about it at the end too, but this is something, I've been doing this work for 20 years, and it always seems like a budget crunch. This is unlike anything that we have experienced yet. And there are 4 big reasons for that. So when we work with our districts, the gaps that they're projecting, and we with them, are somewhere between 8 and 14%. For this coming year, FY 11-12. And then they will be big the next year as well. And the reason why is, first, state revenue is continuing to decline. Even if we have an uptick in the economy, state revenues will lag. And furthermore, states have spent out all their reserves, their rainy day funds and things like that. So there's no give there. So that is, even when we start to think things are going better, they won't be for school systems. That's number one. Two, there's the federal drop in funds that will happen after this year. And we can talk later, there was a big effort not to spend those things on ongoing operating costs, but the reality is, at least half of the dollars were spent on ongoing kinds of operating costs in the districts that we work with. So huge drop in federal spending. Third, we always have had and we continue to have autopilot increases in compensation. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But you need to understand, and the public needs to understand, spending in education goes up automatically every single year, no matter what schools do. And that's because salaries rise automatically with each additional year of service. And benefits have continued to accelerate, somewhere between 5 and 15% a year. And benefits now represent somewhere between 24 and 30% of all compensation spending in school districts around the country. So if 30% of the dollars are going up 15%, you've got automatic increases in spending if you're just doing the same thing. So especially in districts now where we don't have attrition. So we have the teachers staying into those jobs because there aren't alternative jobs. So districts have automatic increases of somewhere between 2 and 5%, and these years it'll be about 5% because the folks will stay in those jobs. So, and the last thing is they're built into education, and we're going to talk a lot about this, is the inability to act against lots of mandated areas. So if you might target certain things that you might want to change, these are all built into legislation, traditions, structures, practices, union contracts. Examples would be special ed, and I'm happy to see that we're going to be talking about, Tom Parrish will be talking about that after this, where it's been an untouched area, and class size kinds of things as well as compensation. So large budget gaps, we can expect to continue them. And just a couple more points. There are 3 ways to kind of address those gaps. One is to be more efficient, and we're probably not going to talk a whole lot about efficiency here because really the districts we've been working in, and there are probably more opportunities for efficiency, but those things are relatively easy, right? Get the bus routes working, figure out how to do food services more cost effectively, those kinds of things. I'm not saying easy, but then there's restructuring. That means fundamentally changing your cost structures, really looking at that. And the third way is dramatic innovation. You can't do dramatic innovation across large sets of kids in large districts. So that's got to happen on the edges in a big way, but you got to fund that through the market in other ways. The opportunity here is restructuring. And looking across the districts, I would say that it's a mixed bag. Because restructuring that gets to a place that we want to aspire to begins with a vision that is about what we want to be in the 21st century and how we can match what we know about the way people work best, our modern workforce, what we know about how children learn, and what we know about how to assess student learning. All of those things would suggest very different organizations of both schools and districts than we have right now. And we need to begin to promote what those visions look like and begin to do restructuring kinds of things that move in the direction of those visions. Painful as they can be, changing the compensation structures, as exciting and wonderful it is truly painful in the interim. Reducing staff in areas that are no longer going to be part of the future, truly painful. But done in the context of a vision of something that's very different is critical. So we see a mixed bag. We see some districts that are really trying to get very clear about this vision and use this moment as an opportunity to move toward it. Others that are doing the same old thing, cutting PD spending, cutting spending on innovation, cutting spending on information, cutting spending on all of that. So it's a mixed bag, and I think we're going to talk more about what we can do to get the bag on the right side.
Thanks, Karen. That's a terrific overview. Matt, why don't you describe, if you will, what's the budget situation like in Prince George's County? And if you could you describe the student-based budget module idea?
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. Hear me okay? Yeah. it's a really unique time in the state of Maryland, Prince George's County. We have a lot of great, exciting things happening. You know, Race to the Top, obviously Prince George's is a major recipient of Race to the Top dollars, almost $25 million. We have a grant from the Dell Foundation and the Broad Foundation, almost $4 million to institute a performance management system. We also got a grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for a couple $1 million to revamp our teacher evaluation system along with the Race to the Top, as well as get, increasing PD and support to get highly effective teaching. So we have all that going. At the same time, we have severe budget issues. Since I've been with the district, this will be the third year in a row we'll have to cut over $100 million out of our budget, which is roughly 7 to 8% of our budget. As Dr. Grasmick alluded to earlier, with the Thornton funding formulas that were instituted in 2002, Prince George's was probably the largest recipient of those increase of dollars. So from 2002 to 2007, we were seeing increases in our budget from 10 to 12% a year. And then, unfortunately for me, when I came on board, those stopped. We were seeing compensation increases of 6 to 7%. And so we were structured for those type of revenue increases year after year. And what we're seeing right now is those aren't happening anymore due to the economic downturn. As Dr. Grasmick alluded to, the state is facing a $1.6 billion deficit. And as being the largest recipient of state money, that we're anticipating again declining revenues. And what's factoring to that is we're seeing decline in enrollment in our district. As Dr. Grasmick alluded to, we have an inverse wealth formula. Well, as the state seems to be getting poorer, the county does not seem to be following as much. And so in the way the formula is structured, the county's getting wealthier. Our problem is our second largest funding source, the county government, has had a tax cap for close to 30 years. So we're unable to receive increased revenues from on the county side as what the formulas would anticipate. And so again, for the third straight year, we're seeing a decline of cuts of over $100 million. This fiscal year, we've had to institute staff furloughs. It was 9 days for the majority of employees in the county, 4 days for teachers. Obviously, it hasn't been popular, but it was something to do in lieu of having to lay off staff. As Karen alluded to earlier, we're seeing a continuing increase in benefit costs. But again, we're going to use this as an opportunity to sort of what we call right-size our district. We grew too big, too fast. Given the new economic realities, we're going to go to we've already instituted a performance-based budgeting system for central office, which ties their dollars to specific outcomes that they have to identify. If those outcomes aren't related to high student achievement or highly effective teaching, then obviously we have to look at those programs or departments and wonder if what they're doing, either change what they're doing or we'll have to make some tough decisions and some cuts. As Sean had pointed out, we're also, not for this fiscal year, but for the next fiscal year, we're going to be instituting a student-based budgeting model, just similar to what we've seen in Baltimore City, and we are partnering with ERS to help us implement that, which is to drive more dollars out of the central office down into the school level, and giving principals autonomy to make the budget decisions, whereas right now, decisions are made more centrally. So we feel like getting the decision-making down to the school level, equitably distributing those resources, we think at the end of the day will help us get the money into right places to see highly effective teaching and high student achievement.
Thanks, Matt. John, what's the budget picture look like in Rochester? And can you describe for us this move towards weighted student funding?
Be happy to. Obviously, if you listen to the numbers, we're in a very similar situation. Let me set the context for Rochester. We're what's called dependent district. We get all of our funding through the state or the city, and we have no ability to raise revenues as a district. So when we see a $9 billion budget deficit for the state of New York this year, we begin to get a little worried because we know there's really no wiggle room at the state level to come at that other than one of the big areas being education. Last year we saw, or this year we see our stabilization dollars going away, our stimulus dollars going away to the tune of about $30 million, another $16, $18 million. That last year we dipped into our district's reserves, anticipating that this economic recession, if you will, would be relatively short-term. Bad guess. We all know that that is not the case. We're going to lag on that, and we're going to see implications of that. That's another loss in revenue that we won't be able to duplicate in the coming year. So from that perspective, we're down $46 to $48 million worth of revenue. As Karen alluded to, this constant growth that we expect to see, whether it is from the 11% contribution for our teacher retirement, 16% for our regular employee retirement, healthcare cost increases, escalating costs across the district for other areas. That brings us another essentially $50 million worth of growth in the budget. So we're looking at about $100 million that we'll have to cut out of a $700 million budget this year. To frame that, as Karen talked about, we can go after efficiencies, and we do, and I know a lot of the large urbans have really started looking at their business operations. 2 to 3 years ago, we started working very closely with the Council of Great City Schools, using the performance indicators out there to drive our business operations. We were able to see some savings as a result of those things, $5 million in transportation. I'll talk about a little more, I think, as we go on, one of the problems with actually achieving a savings out there and what that means to a district. But we really are seeing very, very similar things to what we've seen in the nation. I will be moving to Baltimore, and Maryland, I think, is the message that I got earlier. We're also in the process of going what we call equitable student funding. It's been referred to across the nation, and I like to talk about it as backpack funding. Essentially, our funding dollars will follow our students. That's the equity piece. Similar students with similar characteristics and needs will have the same dollars spent on those students. We are also, as Matt talked about, trying to focus our decision-making closest to the schools. If we were at 30,000 talking, at the Ed Week level, and now we're at 15,000, we really believe that the educational decisions that affect the students and the community come at the 1,000-foot and the 500-foot level in the classrooms with the teachers, the principals, and the parents. So with this funding, we hope to give more autonomies, as we said earlier, to principals to make those decisions and build the budgets. We've been told New York City basically called us lunatics for trying to implement this at this point in a budget cycle with declining revenues. We do think there is a strength in that. Never pass up a good problem, because we think that this will allow our principals to control their fates to a degree. I can sit at central office and put a budget cut, whether it's a peanut butter cut or a very targeted cut, out in our schools, and I don't have a good feel for the impacts it means in the classrooms. By implementing the funding system that we're going towards, we're going to allow decision-making at the school level. It will be painful and it will be tough decision-making, but I think the alternative is much worse when you're talking about making reductions, to have someone do it to you or do it to yourself. So that's where we're at.
Thanks, John. My next question is a bit broader. I'll direct this to Karen, and then Matt and John can follow up. But we're all living in a time where we've seen this unprecedented flow of federal money to states and school districts through the stimulus. And in the years ahead, the federal and state governments are going to be forced to make decisions about how much funding to provide K-12 schools and how to structure that funding. Let me ask you, Karen, in your view, how should the federal government and how should state governments think about structuring that aid in a way that encourages good financial decision-making by districts? Any tips if you were to give them to federal or state policymakers?
Yes. Yes, but I think I want to back up before I answer the question. So I feel like it's important that folks have a really common understanding of what has happened to spending. Amy showed a chart, I think it was, that showed the growth of spending going up, adjusted for inflation, 25% over the last 10 years, I think it was. Well, it's gone up 40% over the last 20, and it's doubled over the last 3 decades, adjusted for inflation. But it's important to know why, right? The reason it has gone up is because we've added more people. We've added a lot more staff folks into the equation. Part of those staff were to reduce class sizes in the elementary school level, and the rest were around all of that, outside of regular classrooms, to do sort of instructional support. The second big reason is that special education spending has grown from 4% of the pie in '67 to now about 22% of the overall budget spending. So it's a huge growth that hasn't been sort of necessarily managed or all of that. And the third area, of course, is benefits and compensation. But the thing to understand about benefits and compensation is it doesn't mean that teachers are earning more relative to others who are at high levels of profession. And so the way that that has come out. So in answer to your question about the federal government and what their role has been, I feel like the guidance that was part of the race to the top, which is to invest in teacher effectiveness through compensation, evaluation, and new forms of doing that, to invest in information systems that enable us to do the kinds of things. I mean, when both John and Matt were talking about student-based budgeting and having principals make decisions, you have to do that in a context of still accountability and a strong belief in principal capacity. And in order to create that accountability, you need almost formative assessment data for schools. You don't just want to know the end goal that they failed, because you need to have information along the way so you can intervene. So investing in powerful and nuanced information about resource use and all of that is what enables the accountability and the increased flexibility. So we want more flexibility in the resources that come from both the state and the federal government. And that actually will free resources that are now devoted to compliance, and they'll free innovation, and they'll free energy, and they'll enable folks to move resources to better purposes, but not without capacity building and without much better information that can both support folks in making better choices and in creating accountability. So back to those 4 guidance areas, it's it's having clear standards and keeping on investing in all of that for students. Teacher effectiveness, information, and I'm forgetting the 4th. But those are the things that the federal government needs to invest in changing. And a couple more things, because I think hopefully you will build on these ideas, is that we've talked a lot about teacher compensation needing to be restructured. I think that both the states and the federal government have not been as out front as we need to be about the big changes needed for productivity, and there are a couple of areas. Class size, moving away from one-size-fits-all class size models is going to be critical, and that has huge ramifications for state policy, for funding, for regulation, and all of that. If we've got Common Core standards and formative assessments that let us know who needs what when, we can do a much better job targeting individual attention. If we've got better information about teacher quality, we can do a much better job matching the most effective teachers to the neediest students, letting the most effective teachers teach more students, and leveraging technology to do that. So one huge source of both productivity improvement and, I would argue, outcome improvement will be relaxing the strict guidelines around what class sizes are in order to enable different kinds of individual attention. A second big area is time. We've treated time, and as you all know, but it's a productivity thing, it's a state policy thing, it's a federal policy piece. If we have to organize time in strict blocks, and we only have 6 hours and 15 minutes, as we do in some of the districts that we work in and during the day, and that amount stays the same no matter who you are or how you're performing, we're not going to get there from here. And so building on what Nancy Grasmick was talking about, we need to change our notions of what the number of years it takes for some students and how time is organized and structured. And right now, states and even the feds get in the way of being creative about the use of time and reallocating dollars to be able to use them in different ways.
let me ask the district officials here. I'll start with you, John. I mean, it's one thing to talk about spending money differently or making cuts or trying to restructure how you're spending money, but I mean, it's another thing to actually try to execute those plans. What are some of the barriers you face in a school district in terms of trying to take a different approach to how you allocate resources?
I think a lot of the things that we've started addressing are barriers that we see across the nation. I'd like to first of all say that we're very fortunate in New York. Commissioner Steiner has been very forward-thinking and pursuing a number of things around tying teachers, evaluations, and performance to student outcomes. Prior to the race to the top, we actually had state legislation that was a firewall to that ability to do that. So the race to the top did make a policy implication change that we feel is going to be very important. We will now be able to use up to 40% of a teacher principal evaluation tied to their student outcomes. Again, critical, very similar to the 50% of Maryland. Remembering at the policy level, and I'm clearly not a policy person, so this is someone who's looking at it from the user's end. Remember that there are policies out there coming at us from all different departments and organizations, and some of those create conflicts. Some of those drive costs that we don't even know about. We felt very good that we were able to negotiate a healthcare contract that was fixed for 3 years and frozen. And the new federal healthcare policies, as beneficial as they are, in fact drove another $2 million cost because we now cover 25 to 26-year-olds. We covered up to 25-year-olds. So that $2 million incremental cost, oh, by the way, is of concern about whether that can be passed to our employees and our team as opposed to being absorbed by the district. But again, an example of one policy affecting an overall approach to business. The other thing I'd like to hope for is some flexibility around the color of money, the use of money. Please create policies that direct or guide us towards an outcome, an achievement that you would like to see, obviously focused on student achievement, and shy away from, in that policy, telling us how to get there. The how to get there is the critical part of the work on the ground, and that's where we'll gain efficiencies, that's where we'll gain creativity in how we approach those policies. The last thing that I talked to was there is no incentive for a district other than you don't have any money, which is normally a pretty good driver, but there is no incentive to save money. And I believe, I saw this at the federal level when we were repairing aircraft at the depot, and I see it in education as well. There needs to be an incentive to save. If we're able to save $5 million in our transportation contract, it would be nice if for 1 year, 2 years, we would get a portion of that savings, whether it be 50% or 25%, that could be reinvested in our initiatives to improve both our classroom efforts and our operational efforts. So give an incentive towards improvement, and then that becomes a self-funding incentive. Right now, if I save $5 million, that just means the state doesn't spend it the next year. The reimbursements are adjusted. So I think there's a way of looking at incentivizing people to go after savings and reduce their overall budget and make that a self-funding mechanism somewhere along the line.
Matt, would you follow up on that at all?
I mean, I think to follow what John said, the big thing that stimulus dollars, the influx of dollars did was not, we were having the conversation about tenure, having the conversation about evaluation reform, and those dollars made it a reality. Whether it's, again, using performance data for what's 50% in the state of Maryland for teacher and principal evaluation, whether it's in my district with the school improvement stimulus money, we have 4 turnaround schools. We were able to give signing bonuses to principals to come into these, which were historically very hard to staff schools. It gave us the opportunity to structure the school in a different way. At one of our schools, we have a co-principal model that we have 2 of our resident principals from new leaders from new schools, running the school. And it's, definitely interesting and new innovative ways to try and do what the ultimate goal is to increase student achievement. But at the same time, we saw, because of stimulus, our federal dollars increase from 100 million to 200 million, and now I'm facing next year that number going back down to 100 million. I think with the Title I and special education stimulus dollars, it did allow us to try some new things, invest in some data systems. We did an early intervention reading program for special ed to actually hopefully prevent children from entering into special education. And I think what it's done is allow us to do is see what's working and then invest our general operating dollars in those programs. But again, it'll be at the expense of something else that's maybe not as effective.
We've set aside some time for questions, and I think there's a mic floating around, so if you have any questions for the panelists, yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Bob Rothman with the Alliance for Excellent Education. At the same time that you're trying to dig yourselves out of these holes, both of your states have signed on to the Common Core standards, which have a lot of implications for professional development, assessment, curriculum, and other areas. How do you plan to manage that, or are there some compromises you need to make because of the challenges you face?
First thing I'd like to say is that the budget conversation really is always framed in academic perspective, in that lens, and it's about our student achievement and increasing our graduation rate and closing the gap and making sure that our students succeed. And that work around transformation or redesign or whatever we're calling the work of building the new education system out there really has to start from the strategic lens. And we've been working, I know other districts as well, have really started with their strategic planning focus, and then aligning those resources, whatever you have, aligning them to the key areas that you're working on. In Rochester's case, we're focusing in 3 areas. We're focusing on creating a portfolio of schools that offers a broad spectrum of opportunities and experiences for our students. We're talking about human capital initiatives, which are really the focus on our capacity development for both principals and teachers. How do we get the most highly effective teacher in front of the most needy student? And the third one just went out of my mind as I was talking. Portfolio. We're working on equity, obviously, of distributing the wealth equitably across the district and making sure that every student has an equal chance of success. So I think that's the key. You've always got to prioritize what you want to accomplish and then start putting your dollars on it. We can no longer have the smorgasbord of options out there. We have to, I heard focus and fidelity mentioned earlier. We have to be laser-like on those things that we know are working in our district, in our context, and really focus on those things and use our resources. As Karen talked to, we've got to make adjustments. Seat time is no longer a value proposition out there. If students are ready to move on, we need to be able to move them on to that next level. And if they need longer, we need to be able to focus time around that. So it's that use of money and time around the strategically important educational efforts that we've got going on.
Yeah, I mean, you have to work with your, in my case, my chief academic officer, and it's about prioritization. You cannot have, 500 priorities. So in our district, it's, the Common Core standards, which we are adopting. It's secondary school reform, again, offering a variety of options to our high schoolers, variety of programs. It's, again, human capital reform. It's those type of things that with the limited resources you have to invest in measuring what works.
Are there any? Yes, sir. We'll send the mic your way.
Thank you. Joe D'Amico and Associates, representing Absolute Success. Could the panelists speak for a moment about the impact that the financial situation is having on the charter schools and vice versa, what impact the charter schools are having on the financial situation in each of your situations?
Yeah, I can address. We're opening, I think, 3 new charter schools next year. We follow what's a formula for funding for charter schools, backing out certain things like administration, transportation, and things like that. And I think per pupil, because our budgets are going down, their budgets are going down too. So I don't see really a major impact either way as on our budget as far as the charters are concerned.
But at a macro level, it's actually really huge. Because if you have schools that operate inside of districts, inside of states, that have to follow a strict set of rules that are mandated around certain inputs. You have to have certain class sizes, you have to use time in a certain way, and you have to use certain staffing models and have one of something in every building. And you have a set of schools in a tough crisis that don't have those same kind of restrictions and yet have the same standards. Which set of schools is going to emerge with new models and new ability to use scarce funds in a different way? So what we see happening in some of the districts that we're working in is that the charter schools are able to do more with less because they have more flexibility, and so they're able to change their compensation structures and attract sort of the best and the brightest in that context. I wouldn't say it's everywhere, but I would say that what it does is it creates pressure to open up flexibilities that charter schools do enjoy in order to do that. And it's our effort when we're working inside of districts to be very clear about the flexibilities that the charter schools enjoy that are not also held for a variety of reasons by the school districts inside the district. That gets back to the earlier thing we were talking about, is if every single dollar that you're currently spending, you get cut down to a certain amount and every single dollar you're spending is mandated, you've got nowhere to go, whereas charter schools can play with the whole pie. So I do think that scarcity is going to actually mean that innovation is going to take place, especially in certain states, inside a charter school, unless we create more flexibility.
We have time for another question. Yes, sir.
Yes, I'm Barry Stern with the Haberman Educational Foundation. And in the last month, Arnie Duncan, Jeb Bush, and Governor Bob Wise, former Governor Bob Wise, have all agreed that the factory model high school is obsolete. It's not sustainable financially. And here we have two districts, Prince George's and Rochester, that I know are trying to change a bit of that and trying to do it with less money. So how did you do it? What's been your approach? What's working politically for you in terms of still 85% of the kids who go to high school are going to the usual school where you change what you're doing with whom every 15 minutes in response to a bell. And we know that doesn't work for half the kids. And I know your scores in Prince George's and in Rochester, having applied for funding from both of your districts. And I've seen your scores, and I know that high school model simply isn't working, and yet you are working in a very deliberate way to improve on the results of those schools and perhaps change the structure of the model. Can you tell us a bit how you're doing it?
I'd say, first of all, that focus on that conversation has been the key starting point. We have talked and are working to ensure that the adults in the organization understand that the outcomes that we currently have and in the past have delivered are not acceptable. And so it really becomes a focus that we need to improve that high school outcome for our students. We also are looking at, as I said, creating the portfolio of schools. We're trying to have opportunities as we go through our persistently low achieving schools that are identified and transform, redesign those schools. One of the objectives has been to try and partner with an outside organization, whether it be community-based or otherwise, that can help not only set a framework and a tone for the school, but hold the school accountable as we go through expeditionary learning, for example, that model where we partnered on that school. And as we made those changes, which were funded using our Race to the Top dollars, we've tried to get those partnerships together. So we create a smaller school, but not driven just because small schools were in or vogue, but to try and really focus on student needs and individuality and required learning that needs to take place. So those are some of the things we did, that partnership, going to a smaller school, asking principals to take accountability for that population. We can't have, when the superintendent came on board, he asked the question, where's the cohort that's ready to graduate this year? And we didn't, at that point, have the data. That we talked about systems. We've had to create systems that allow us to look at cohort by cohort, their tracking on individual coursework, their work around the regents' exams that they must take. And that data has also been instrumental in beginning to transform where we're going.
Yeah, it's about options and opportunities. So 2 years ago, the district set in and redistricted both the elementary schools and middle schools. And then we began to look at the high schools, and when we looked at the data, we noticed our higher performing high schools were overcrowded, and our underperforming high schools were underutilized. And so we made a conscious decision and said, instead of just redrawing lines and forcing children into the underutilized schools, why don't we cluster the high schools in such a way and offer programs and options and choices for parents and students to come in and to go to these schools, whether it's a language immersion program at high school, or whether it's we have a very popular science and technology program at Eleanor Roosevelt High School. Why not replicate what's working and move it into other parts of the county? One of the issues is the county is so massive. So if you apply and get into the Eleanor Roosevelt Science and Tech program, there's a good chance that you may have a 40 to 45 minute bus ride every day back and forth to that high school because the county is so large. And so it's about cost effectiveness by actually starting the program up in all areas of the county, shortening those transportation distances again, and then offering options and opportunities. From a financial standpoint, we are just beginning, and it's going to be a phased-in approach, probably over 6 to 7 years, because we can't just with the dollars we're getting, we can't do this all at once. But so we're phasing it in. But that's really the vision that Dr. Height, the superintendent, has laid out to the community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if I might kind of close on that, because I think it actually, we can make a comment that captures all of this based on this. I mean, high schools have been our slowest kind of segment of education to change. And I would argue that that's because of the rigid structures that are inside high schools. If you think about all these paradigms that I've been talking about that have to change, one teacher for every student, isolated classrooms, one size fits all class sizes, rigid use of time, all of those things have broken down already at the elementary school level. And they're, in high-performing schools, teachers are working as teams. You have special ed folks coming in. They're regrouping kids across classrooms and across time. Teachers have always been able to adjust time when the kids don't get something and to change it up. You always have had, it's much easier to allocate students and match students and teachers, to all of that. Middle school, a little harder, right? But you're still doing core courses, teaming. You can adjust time by blocking. So much harder at the high school level. And what's so exciting really about this moment in time is that it's going to be so bad that but really it gives an opportunity to actually force movement at the high school level where we haven't done it before, and really re-examine those rigid structures that make resources so difficult to reallocate and target to kids. So, sort of with a vision of common standards and kind of personalizing education and teachers working in teams, we can then look across at all the places where that is not happening inside of high schools today and think about this moment as really moving in a direction to kind of redirect resources to teaching of core subjects and to individualize attention in core subjects and to flexible time around that.
That's all the time we have for this panel. I want to thank our panelists for their thoughts. They will be around. So feel free to corner them at will while they're
That's right. And thank you, everyone. I know we're getting to lunch a little bit late, but perhaps you'll have a chance to continue the conversation over food. Lunch will be downstairs on the 9th floor, and we will convene here for the afternoon program at 2 o'clock sharp. So be here at 2, and we'll see you then.